The
Keep
rain
still. This
came
will
down
stop the
like
bleeding.
bullets through the Montana pines, each drop a small
Thanks, old
violence
man.
against the forest floor.
I owe you.
Somewhere in the darkness, a man was screaming.
I ain't done yet.
Silas Brennan's finger rested
Not by
against
a
the
long
trigger
shot.
of his AR-15, steady as stone, despite the thunder
Just
rolling
getting
through the
warmed up.
mountains. At 73 years old, his hands didn't shake anymore. They'd forgotten
I
how.
found something.
6 headlights cut
Prepare the
through the
team.
trees ahead, engines growling like wolves circling wounded prey. Behind him, pressed against the wet earth, 3 younger men breathed in ragged gasps, blood mixed with rainwater running dark between the pine needles. "Stay down," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of a command. "Don't move. Don't breathe. Let them think you're already dead." The lead vehicle stopped 30 yards out. Doors opened, boots hit mud. Silas counted 6 men in the overlapping beams of the headlights. 2 wore leather vests with serpent patches. The other 4 moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who'd learned their trade in places where mercy was a liability. "Old man," the voice carried a thick Eastern European accent, confident and cruel. "We know you're out here. Come out, and this ends clean." Silas didn't answer. In the silence between thunderclaps, he could hear his own heartbeat, slow and measured. Beirut had taught him patience. Prague had taught him silence. 50 years of war had taught him that sometimes the only way to win was to make your enemy think they'd already lost you. The wind shifted. Pine branches swayed. And for just a moment, in the fraction of a second between one breath and the next, Silas Brennan disappeared into the forest like smoke. They say legends are born in fire. That night in the Montana wilderness, a legend 73 years old reminded 6 men why old wolves are the most dangerous kind. 48 hours earlier, the first light of Tuesday morning touched the peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains like a blessing, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded Silas of sunrises in places he'd sworn never to think about again. He stood on the porch of his ranch house, coffee steaming in the cold air, and watched the forest wake up around him. 25 miles from the nearest town, 47 miles from the nearest hospital. The kind of isolation that made most people nervous made Silas sleep better at night. His ranch sat in a natural bowl carved into the mountainside, surrounded by dense pine forest on 3 sides and backed against a granite cliff face that would take a mountain goat to climb. The approach road was a single dirt track that wound through 5 miles of forest, visible from a dozen different vantage points. Anyone coming to visit would be seen long before they arrived. Most people would call it paranoid. Silas called it tactical advantage. He drained his coffee and walked the perimeter like he did every morning. The motion sensor cameras he'd installed in the trees were all functioning. The tripwires he'd strung across the less obvious approach paths showed no signs of disturbance. The cache of supplies he kept buried in the northwest quadrant was still undisturbed, the marker stone exactly where he'd placed it 3 days ago. Old habits died hard. Marine habits never died at all. Back inside, Silas cleaned his rifle with the same methodical care he'd learned at Paris Island 55 years ago. Strip, clean, oil, reassemble, check the action, load the magazine, chamber around, safe the weapon. Every movement, precise muscle memory so deep it didn't require thought. On the wall above his workbench hung a photograph in a simple black frame. 5 young men in Marine Corps dress uniforms, 1983, standing in front of a barracks that no longer existed. Silas was in the middle, 30 years old and still believing the world made sense. The others were all smiling. All of them were dead now, except him. He touched the frame briefly, a ritual he'd performed every morning for 41 years, then turned away and headed for the barn. The hunting rifle was already in his truck. Deer season had opened 2 weeks ago, and he'd seen fresh tracks near the Salt Lick 5 miles north. The freezer was already half full, but venison lasted through the winter, and winter in Montana could be long and unforgiving. He drove out as the sun crested the mountains, taking the old logging road that cut deep into the national forest. The truck was a 20-year-old Ford, dented and sun-faded, the kind of vehicle that didn't attract attention in ranch country. Under the hood was an engine he'd rebuilt himself, powerful enough to outrun anything short of a helicopter. The radio played Johnny Cash, low and mournful. Silas didn't sing along. He never did. 3 miles in, he killed the engine and continued on foot. The forest was alive with morning sounds. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the distant drum of a woodpecker working a dead pine. Silas moved through it all like a ghost, his boots finding the quiet places between the branches, his body remembering the rhythms of patrol from wars that most Americans had forgotten. The deer trail crossed a small creek, following the water north toward higher ground. Silas had walked this path 100 times. He knew every rock, every fallen log, every place where the earth was soft enough to hold a print. which was why he stopped cold when he heard the sound that didn't belong. Metal on metal, faint, maybe 2 miles northeast deeper in the forest where the old mining roads used to run. Then silence. Silas stood perfectly still, breathing slowly through his nose, listening to the forest with every sense trained to detect what shouldn't be there. In Beirut, this skill had kept him alive when 241 of his brothers had died. In Prague, it had put him 3 steps ahead of men who'd spent their whole lives learning to kill. In Montana, it made him the best hunter in 3 counties. The sound didn't repeat, but silence could be louder than noise when you knew how to listen to it. Silas adjusted his rifle and started northeast. The old mining road was more of a suggestion than an actual road, 2 ruts carved through the undergrowth by trucks that hadn't run in 30 years. Silas approached it from downwind using the trees for cover, his eyes scanning the ground for signs of recent passage. He found them 50 yards from the creek. Tire tracks. Fresh. Heavy vehicles, probably SUVs, with aggressive tread patterns designed for off-road work. They'd come in from the main Forest Service road, 3 miles south, following the mining track, deeper into the wilderness where cell phone signals died and satellite coverage was spotty at best. The tracks led north. Silas followed. Half a mile in, he smelled gasoline. Then rubber. Then something else, copper sweet and unmistakable. Blood. The motorcycles lay in a clearing like broken toys, 3 Harley-Davidsons, with their chrome catching the morning light at impossible angles. They'd been forced off the mining road and into the trees with enough violence to bend metal and shatter plastic. Fuel leaked from ruptured tanks, making dark rainbows in the dirt. And beside them, scattered like discarded clothing, were 3 men. Silas approached carefully, rifle-ready eyes scanning the tree line for threats. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no squirrels. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. The first man lay face down in the dirt, arms spread wide, leather vest torn and bloody. Silas knelt beside him, fingers finding the pulse point on his neck. Weak but present, still alive. The second man had made it further, maybe 10 feet, before collapsing against a fallen log. His left arm bent at an angle that made Silas's jaw tighten. Compound fracture bone pressing against skin that hadn't broken yet. He'd need surgery within hours or he'd lose the arm. The third man was the youngest, maybe 25, with blonde hair matted dark with blood, where something heavy had caught him across the temple. He was breathing, but his pupils were different sizes when Silas checked them with his flashlight. Concussion. Possibly serious. Silas sat back on his heels and surveyed the scene with the clinical detachment that came from 30 years of seeing men broken by violence. 3 motorcycles. 3 riders. And all wearing matching vests with an iron wolf patch on the back. They'd been ambushed. Forced off the road. Beaten systematically, professionally. This wasn't road rage or a random attack. This was methodical. Someone had wanted information, and when they didn't get it, they decided to make a point. But there was something else. Something that made the hair stand up on the back of Silas's neck. He found it when he examined the first man more closely. The shoulder wound wasn't from a fist or a boot. The flesh was torn in a distinctive pattern, deep punctures surrounded by shallower cuts. Silas had seen wounds like this before in the mountains of Afghanistan and the forests of Bosnia. Animal attack, recent, within the last hour. He stood slowly, rifle coming up as he scanned the tree line again. Bear tracks in the soft earth near the motorcycles. Large ones, grisly, probably drawn by the smell of blood and gasoline. But the tracks led away back into the deeper forest. The bear had investigated and moved on. Silas looked at the tire tracks leading back toward the main road, looked at the 3 broken men, looked at the pattern of violence written in blood and bent metal, and understood exactly what had happened here. Someone had beaten these men, dragged them into the wilderness, and left them to die, knowing that between blood loss and hypothermia and the wildlife that roamed these mountains, nature would finish the job without leaving any evidence of murder. It was clean, it was efficient, and it was exactly the kind of killing Silas had seen in wars that officially never happened. The first man groaned, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded with pain. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a wet cough that brought up blood. Most 73-year-old men would have ridden back to the ranch, called 911, and let the professionals handle it. Let the ambulances come, let the police investigate, let the system work the way it was supposed to work. Silas Brennan had learned in Beirut that sometimes help arrived too late, that sometimes the only difference between living and dying was the person who happened to be standing there when it mattered. He knelt beside the first man and opened his go bag. The medical supplies inside were military-grade, vacuum-sealed, and regularly rotated to keep them fresh. Field dressings, trauma pads, quick clot, morphine auto-injectors. Everything a combat medic would need to keep someone alive long enough to reach a hospital that might be hours away. Silas had carried a bag like this through 3 wars. He'd used it to save lives in places where the nearest doctor was a helicopter right away, and the helicopters weren't always coming. His hands moved with practiced efficiency muscle memory overriding the stiffness of age. He packed the shoulder wound with quick clot and wrapped it tight. Checked for exit wounds, found none. The bear had bitten once and moved on. The man's eyes tracked Silas's face, trying to focus, trying to understand who this gray-haired stranger in hunting clothes was and why he was there and whether he was about to finish what someone else had started. "Easy," Silas said quietly. "You're hurt bad, but you're not dead. Not yet. Not on my watch." He moved to the second man. The compound fracture needed to be stabilized before he could move him. Silas found 2 straight branches and his emergency medical tape, fashioning a splint with the same care a surgeon would use on an operating table. The third man was the most concerning. Head trauma was unpredictable. The kid might wake up fine, or he might slip into a coma and never wake up at all. Silas elevated his head slightly, checked his airway, made sure his tongue wasn't blocking his breathing. Then he sat back and made the calculation every combat medic learns to make. 3 wounded men, miles from help, temperature dropping as the morning wore on, blood loss, shock, hypothermia, wildlife. Moving them alone would take hours. Calling for help would bring questions he couldn't answer without revealing things about himself that needed to stay buried. But leaving them would mean death. Slow, cold, certain. Silas pulled his satellite phone from his pack and stared at it for a long moment. The phone was a relic from another life registered to a name that didn't exist anymore. Using it would light up screens in Fort Meade, and Langley would send alerts to people who thought he was dead and buried in a cemetery in Arlington. He put the phone away. Instead, he checked the magazine in his rifle and started moving. The first man was conscious enough to understand basic commands. Silas got him sitting upright, back against a tree, rifle placed across his lap. "Anyone comes down that road who isn't me," Silas said, making sure the man's eyes were tracking. "You shoot first and ask questions later." "Understand." The man nodded weakly. Silas jogged back to his truck, covering the half-mile in less time than most men half his age could manage. Muscle memory again, the same pace he'd used on forced marches through the jungle, through the desert, through the mountains of a dozen different countries. He drove the truck as close as he could get, parking on the mining road and covering the last 200 yards on foot. Then began the slow, careful process of moving 3 broken men from the forest floor to the truck bed. The first man could walk with support. Silas got him loaded, wrapped in an emergency blanket, positioned where he could keep pressure on his shoulder wound. The second man screamed when Silas moved him, the pain of the broken arm cutting through whatever shock had been keeping him numb. Silas gave him morphine, waited for it to take the edge off, then carried him in a fireman's lift to the truck. The third man never woke up. Silas cradled his head, keeping the neck stable, moving with the exaggerated care of someone who knew exactly how fragile the human body could be. When all 3 were loaded, Silas stood in the clearing and looked at the motorcycles one more time. Harley Davidsons. Custom work. Expensive. The kind of bikes that meant something to the men who rode them. They'd have serial numbers, registrations, names attached to titles. Leaving them here would raise questions, but taking them would be impossible with just his truck. Silas pulled a small notebook from his pack and wrote down the VIN numbers from each motorcycle. Then he covered the bikes with branches and brush, not hiding them especially, but making them less obvious from the road. The drive back to the ranch took 45 minutes, slow and careful over terrain that would rattle a younger man's spine. The first man stayed conscious, watching Silas with eyes that were starting to clear from the shock. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, damaged, but functional. "Someone who knows what it looks like when men are left to die," Silas replied, not taking his eyes off the road. "Why help us?" Silas was quiet for a moment, navigating around a fallen log. "In Beirut, 1983, I was buried under rubble for 6 hours. Barracks got hit by a truck bomb. 241 Marines died. I should have been number 242. He shifted gears, the truck climbing a steep grade. 3 Marines I'd never met spent those 6 hours digging me out with their bare hands. Hands bleeding, backs broken. They didn't ask who I was, didn't ask if I was worth saving. They just did what Marines do." The truck crested the hill. "You boys stood up to something. I can see it in how you were beaten. Someone wanted information. You didn't give it. That's worth something." The first man was quiet after that. The ranch appeared through the trees like a promise of safety. Silas pulled the truck around to the barn, backing up to the wide double doors that led to the workshop inside. The barn looked like any other Montana outbuilding from the outside. Weathered wood, rusted hinges, the kind of structure that had been standing for 50 years and would stand for 50 more. Inside was different. Silas had spent 15 years preparing this space for a day he hoped would never come. The workshop ran the full length of the barn, equipped with tools that could build or repair almost anything. The walls were lined with shelves holding supplies that most ranchers would never need. And beneath the workshop, accessible through a hidden panel in the floor, was something else entirely. But that could wait. Right now, 3 men needed medical attention that went beyond field dressings and morphine. Silas got them inside one at a time, laying them on clean tarps he'd spread across the workshop floor. The second man was starting to come around from the morphine, his eyes focusing with the confused awareness of someone waking up in a place they didn't recognize. The third man still hadn't opened his eyes. Silas worked quickly, started an IV line on the second man's saline to counter the blood loss. Checked the first man's shoulder wound, changed the dressing, made sure the bleeding had stopped. Monitored the third man's pupils, checked his reflexes, and made the decision he'd been avoiding. The kid needed a hospital. Real doctors, a CT scan, maybe surgery. But getting him there would mean questions, police reports, investigations. And Silas had learned a long time ago that sometimes the cost of asking for help was higher than the cost of solving the problem yourself. He pulled the hidden panel in the workshop floor. The stairs led down into darkness. Silas descended carefully, his hand finding the light switch from memory. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, revealing a space that no rancher should have. The bunker was 10 feet by 20, carved into the bedrock beneath the barn and reinforced with steel and concrete. The air was cool and dry, climate-controlled by a system that ran on solar panels hidden in the forest and backed up by batteries that could run for weeks. One wall held weapons, AR-15 sawn, shotguns, pistols. Not a collection, but an arsenal, each weapon clean and oiled and ready to use. Ammunition was stored in sealed containers, organized by caliber. Another wall held medical supplies. More than a field kit, less than a hospital, but enough to keep someone alive while you figured out what to do next. The third wall held something more concerning. A laptop sat on a metal desk connected to a satellite uplink that bypassed every conventional communication network. Beside it were 3 passports, each bearing Silas's photograph but different names. Cash in multiple currencies, gold coins, and a wooden box that hadn't been opened in 15 years. Silas ignored all of it and grabbed what he needed. More eye bags, better bandages, antibiotics, pain medication that was stronger than morphine but wouldn't put someone into a coma. He carried it all upstairs and got to work. The second man was awake enough to talk by the time Silas finished changing his bandages. His eyes tracked the barn, taking in the equipment, the tools, the careful organization of a space that looked like a workshop but functioned like something else entirely. "This isn't a normal ranch," he said. "No," Silas agreed. "It's not. You're not a normal rancher." "No." The man studied Silas's face. Late 40s maybe, with the kind of weathered features that came from years of wind and sun. His hands were scarred. His eyes were sharp despite the pain. "Who are you, really?" Silas was silent for a moment, checking the IV line, adjusting the flow rate. "Right now, I'm the man keeping you alive. The rest doesn't matter. It matters to me." "Why, bum?" "Because men don't just randomly save strangers anymore. Not like this. Not with—" He gestured at the medical supplies, the expertise, the quiet competence that spoke of long experience. "Not with whatever this is." Silas met his eyes. "What's your name?" "Decker. Decker Kane. You ride with the Iron Wolves." Decker's eyes flickered with surprise. "You know the club. I know the patch on your vest." Decker was quiet for a moment. "Then, yeah, I'm the president. Was driving with 2 of my brothers when—" He trailed off memory, catching up with pain. Silas waited. "They ran us off the road," Decker said finally. 4 SUVs. Came out of nowhere on Route 47. Forced us into the forest. We tried to outrun them, but they knew the roads better than we did." He touched his shoulder, wincing. "When they caught us, they didn't want our bikes, didn't want our money. They wanted to know where we keep the clubhouse funds, the emergency stash." "Did you tell them?" "No," Decker's voice was flat, hard. "We don't talk to outsiders, ever. That's the first rule." "So they beat you?" "Yeah. Then they loaded us back in their SUVs, drove us deeper into the forest. Said if we wouldn't talk, we'd disappear. No bodies, no evidence. Just 3 bikers who rode out and never came back." Decker's jaw tightened. "They dumped us in that clearing. Beat us some more. Then they left, said the bears would finish what they started. Silas processed this information with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades analyzing intelligence. Why did they want your money? Not our money, our silence. The Serpent Riders have been pushing into our territory for months. They work for a cartel out of Mexico, moving fentanyl up through Montana into Canada. They wanted us to help. We said no. So they decided to make an example. Yeah. Decker looked at the third man, still unconscious, blood seeping through the bandage on his head. That's Jesse, 25 years old. Prospect. This was supposed to be his first real run. And the other one, Royce Ox Dalton, road captain. Best man I know. Silas finished adjusting the IV and stood. They'll come back. Decker's eyes sharpened. What? The men who did this, they'll want to make sure you're dead. Confirm the job, they'll check that clearing within 24 hours. Then we need to move. Get to the clubhouse, warn the others. You can't move. Not yet. Royce needs surgery on that arm. Jesse needs a hospital. And you've lost too much blood to walk more than 10 feet. So what do we do? Silas looked at him, really looked at him, saw the pain, the fear, the determination to protect his brothers even though he could barely sit upright. It reminded him of Beirut, of men who'd kept fighting even when the barracks was collapsing around them. We wait, Silas said. Let them come. And when they do, we'll see what they're really made of. Decker stared at him. You're talking about fighting. You're 70-something years old. 73. My point exactly. These are killers. Professional muscle. You can't... I've faced worse. Silas's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Beirut, Grenada, Prague. I've looked at death more times than you've looked at a speedometer. Age doesn't change that. It just changes how you plan. He walked to the barn door, looking out at the forest that surrounded his ranch. This is my home. I chose it for the isolation, for the defensible position, for the sight lines and the choke points and all the things that make a good kill zone. Silas turned back to Decker. They want to come finish what they started. Let them. But they'll find out that 3 broken bikers aren't as easy to kill as they thought. Not when they've got backup they didn't count on. Why, Decker's voice was raw. Why risk your life for us? Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. Because 30 years ago, 3 Marines dug through rubble for 6 hours to pull me out. They didn't know my name, didn't know my rank. They just knew a Marine doesn't leave a Marine behind. He met Decker's eyes. You boys stood up to drug dealers, refused dirty money. That's rarer than you think. So yeah, I'll stand with you. That's what Marines do. Outside, the sun was climbing toward noon. The forest was quiet, and somewhere in the distance, engines were starting. The wolves were coming, and Silas Brennan was done running. The sun carved long shadows across the workshop floor as Silas checked Royce's vital signs for the 3rd time in an hour. The big man's pulse was steadier, now the IV fluids doing their work, but the arm was a problem that wouldn't solve itself. The bone needed to be set properly, pins inserted, muscle tissue repaired. Real surgery in a real hospital. But hospitals meant questions. Questions meant police reports. And police reports meant opening doors that Silas had spent 15 years keeping locked. Jesse stirred on the tarp, his eyes flickering beneath closed lids. The concussion symptoms were improving, but slowly. Too slowly. Silas had seen head trauma before, had watched strong men slip away because the damage inside couldn't be seen from the outside. Decker sat with his back against the workbench, fighting to stay conscious despite the blood loss and the morphine working through his system. His eyes tracked Silas's movements with the careful attention of a man who understood he was in the presence of something he didn't fully comprehend. You got a phone? Decker asked, his voice rough, but stronger than it had been an hour ago. I need to warn the club. If the Serpents are willing to do this to us, they'll go after the clubhouse. Silas paused in his work. How many members at the clubhouse? 15, maybe 20 if everyone's there, plus women, kids. We're not just a motorcycle club. We're family. The Serpents know where it is. Everyone knows where it is. We don't hide. Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, Route 12, 40 miles south of here. Been there for 30 years. Silas processed this information. If they wanted to hit the clubhouse, they would have done it already. This was targeted. They took you 3 specifically. Wipe out. Decker's jaw tightened. Because I'm the president. Royce's road captain. Jesse's my brother's kid. We're the leadership. They take us out, the club falls apart. Or it comes looking for you. Yeah, that too. Silas moved to the barn door and looked out at the forest. The afternoon light was golden, painting the pine trees in shades of amber. Beautiful, peaceful. The kind of day that made men forget that evil existed in the world. But Silas had never forgotten. He pulled a phone from his pocket, not the satellite phone from the bunker, a regular cell phone, the kind you could buy at any truck stop with cash and no questions asked. He'd had it for 3 years and used it maybe a dozen times. Make it quick, Silas said, handing it to Decker. No details. Just tell them you're safe and to stay alert. Decker dialed with shaking fingers. The call connected after 2 rings. Hammer, it's Decker. His voice was strained but controlled. Listen to me. We got hit. Serpents. We're alive, but barely. I need you to lock down the clubhouse. Full security. No one in or out unless you know them personally. A pause. Decker's face hardened. I don't care what they told you. We didn't run. We got ambushed and left for dead. Now lock it down and wait for my call. He ended the call and handed the phone back to Silas. They thought we'd deserted. Serpents must have spread word that we took their money and ran. Divide and conquer, Silas said. Classic tactic. Isolate the leaders, demoralize the troops, walk in and take over when everyone's confused. You talk like a soldier. I was, once. Decker studied him. What branch? Marines, Force Recon. When? Silas was quiet for a moment. Long time ago. Different world. Before Decker could push further, Jesse groaned. His eyes opened unfocused and confused pupils, still slightly different sizes, but better than they'd been. He tried to sit up, gasped in pain, and fell back. Silas was beside him in seconds, one hand gentle but firm on the kid's chest. Easy, you've got a concussion. Moving too fast will make it worse. Jesse's eyes tried to focus on Silas's face. Who? Where? You're safe. Your president's here. So is Royce. You're all alive. The serpents? Gone for now. Jesse's breathing steadied. He looked past Silas to where Decker sat, then to Royce lying unconscious nearby. Memory was coming back in fragments, pieces of violence and pain assembling themselves into something coherent. They were gonna leave us for the bears, Jesse whispered. I heard them talking, said we'd just be another hunting accident. 3 stupid bikers who rode too deep into the woods. But you're not, Silas said quietly. You're 3 men who stood up for something, and never for something. That counts. Jesse's eyes filled with tears he was trying hard not to shed. I'm not a man, I'm just a prospect. I serve beer and clean bikes. I don't know how to fight like this. Decker's voice cut across the workshop. Jesse, look at me. The kid turned his head, wincing at the movement. You rode with us when you didn't have to. You stood with us when the serpents came. You didn't break when they beat you. That makes you more than a prospect. That makes you a brother. Jesse nodded weakly, the tears finally spilling over. Silas stood and walked back to the barn door. The shadows were lengthening. In another hour it would be dusk. And in the darkness, men with bad intentions would come to finish what they'd started. He needed help, real help, the kind that couldn't be found in a phone book or summoned with a 911 call. Silas descended into the bunker and sat at the metal desk. The laptop came to life at his touch, its encrypted connection tunneling through layers of security that would make most hackers weep with frustration. He typed a message into a window that looked like a blank screen to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Ghost to Shepard, situation hot, serpent riders plus Russian contractors, 3 civilians in my care, requesting immediate support. Authorization code Whiskey Tango 77. The response came in less than 30 seconds. Shepard to Ghost, you were supposed to stay dead. Silas typed back. Death took a rain check. I need the pack. Full deployment. Another pause, longer this time. Pack status, Doc is 2 hours out. Hawk is 3. Boom is 4. Confirm you want them all hot. Silas's fingers hovered over the keys. Calling them meant admitting that Silas Brennan, retired rancher, was actually someone else. Someone with resources that ranchers didn't have. Someone with a past that was supposed to stay buried. But 3 men were bleeding in his barn, and somewhere in the forest, killers were preparing to come back and finish the job. He typed, confirmed, full deployment, weapons hot. Understood, sending coordinates and current intel. Ghost be advised, serpents are fronting for Dmitry Volkov. He's stateside, released 4 months ago. You're on his list. The name hit Silas like a physical blow. Prague, 1987, a warehouse raid that had gone perfectly until it hadn't. A Russian arms dealer who'd been trafficking more than just weapons. Women, children. Human cargo sold to the highest bidder. Silas had put him away for 30 years, testified in a closed hearing that had sent Volkov to a Czech prison where violent criminals went to disappear. Apparently, he hadn't disappeared far enough. Silas closed the laptop and climbed back upstairs. Decker was watching him with sharp eyes. "You got resources," Decker said. It wasn't a question. "Some. More than some." That wasn't a call to 911. Silas checked Royce's IV line, buying time to think about how much to say. "I have friends. They're coming." "What kind of friends?" "The kind who've been in situations like this before." Decker was quiet for a moment. "You're not a rancher, are you?" "I am now. What I was before doesn't matter." "It does if it's going to get us killed." Silas met his eyes. "The men who did this to you, they're not just motorcycle thugs. They're professionals. Military training, combat experience. They move like soldiers and think like tacticians." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen their type before. In Bosnia, in Iraq, in places that don't exist on maps. They're contractors, mercenaries. And they're working for someone who has a very long memory and a very specific grudge against me." Decker absorbed this. "So we were bait." "Yeah. And now they'll come back, either to confirm you're dead or to use you to draw me out. Either way, they're coming." When Silas looked at the fading light outside, "Soon, they'll want to move at dusk, dark enough for cover, light enough to see what they're doing. And your friends, 2 hours minimum, maybe 3. So we're alone for 2 hours against professional killers." "Not alone," Silas said quietly. "You've got me, and I've been preparing for this kind of fight since before you were born." He walked to the back of the workshop and pulled aside a heavy tarp. Underneath was a gun cabinet that looked like it belonged in an armory, not a barn. He unlocked it with a combination that his fingers knew by heart. AR-15 sawing, 3 of them, each one customized with optics and tactical lights, Glock pistols and shoulder holsters, shotguns, ammunition in quantities that made it clear this wasn't a hunting collection. Decker stared. "Jesus Christ, who are you?" Silas loaded magazines with practiced efficiency. "Right now, I'm the man between you and the people who want you dead. That's all you need to know." He pulled a tactical vest from the cabinet and started loading it with magazines. "Can you shoot?" "Yeah." "Good. When they come, you'll need to. Jesse, what about you?" The kid's voice was small. "I've shot cans behind the clubhouse, never at a person." "Then you'll stay down and stay quiet. Sometimes the best thing you can do in a fight is not become a target." Royce stirred, his eyes opening, for the first time since Silas had brought him to the barn. He looked around in confusion, then focused on Decker. "Boss, easy ox, you're banged up pretty bad." Royce tried to move and gasped as his broken arms sent white-hot pain through his nervous system. What happened?" "Serpents left us for dead. This man pulled us out." Decker nodded towards Silas. "Name's Silas. He's been keeping us alive." Royce looked at Silas with eyes that were clearing from the morphine haze. Why, it was the same question they all asked. The same question Silas had been asking himself since he'd found 3 broken men in a forest clearing and decided to get involved instead of walking away. "Because some things are worth fighting for," Silas said, "and men who stand up to drug dealers are on that list." He handed Decker an AR-15. "You know how to use this?" "Yeah, Marine Corps 2 tours Afghanistan before I got out." Silas paused, something shifting in his expression. "What years?" 2008 to 2012. Helmand Province mostly. "I know some Marines from that rotation. Good men." "You said you were force recon when, before your time." Silas didn't elaborate. "You're going to need to move to a defensive position." "Can you walk?" Decker tested his legs, standing slowly with one hand on the workbench for support. He swayed but stayed upright. "Yeah, not running any marathons, but I can move." "Good. There's a position in the barn loft with a clear view of the approach road. You'll go there with this rifle. Don't fire unless I give the signal." "What about you?" "I'll be where they don't expect me to be." Before Decker could ask what that meant, headlights appeared at the far end of the access road. 2 vehicles moving fast, kicking up dust that glowed golden in the setting sun. Silas moved to the barn door and watched them approach. "They're early. That's good. Means they're confident. Confident men make mistakes." He turned to Decker. "Loft. Now. Jesse, Royce, you stay exactly where you are and don't make a sound." Decker climbed the ladder to the loft, moving slower than he would have liked, but getting there. Silas handed up the rifle and a box of ammunition. "Remember, don't fire until I signal. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear. Wait for my signal." "What's the signal?" Silas smiled, and for just a moment, Decker saw the young Marine who'd survived Beirut. You'll know it when you see it. Then Silas was moving fast and fluid, despite his 73 years, disappearing through a door at the back of the barn that Decker hadn't even noticed was there. The vehicles pulled into the ranch yard and stopped. Doors opened. 6 men climbed out, 4 of them carrying weapons, openly not bothering to hide what they'd come for. The lead man was the same Russian who'd questioned Silas earlier. Alexei. He stood in the fading light and looked at the barn, at the ranch house, at the empty spaces where a frightened old man should have been cowering. Brennan, his voice carried across the yard. We know you took them. Come out, and we can talk. No one else needs to get hurt. Silence answered him. Just the wind in the pines and the distant call of a crow. Alexei nodded to his men. They spread out, 2 heading for the ranch house, 2 for the barn, 2 staying with the vehicles as rear guard. From his position in the loft, Decker watched them move. Professional, coordinated. These weren't thugs or muscle. These were soldiers. His finger rested against the trigger guard of the AR-15, not on the trigger itself. Discipline, training, the same lessons that had kept him alive in Helmand. The 2 men approaching the barn were 50 feet out when the first shot rang out. Not from Decker, not from the barn. The shot came from somewhere in the forest to the north, a sharp crack that echoed off the mountains. One of the men dropped instantly, his weapon clattering to the ground. The other dove for cover behind a water trough. Alexei shouted orders in Russian. The 2 men at the ranch house sprinted back toward the vehicles. The rear guard brought up their weapons, scanning the tree line. Another shot, another man down. Decker's military training kicked in automatically, analyzing the sound, the timing, the precision. Whoever was shooting knew exactly what they were doing. 2 shots, 2 kills from a concealed position at least 200 yards out. Sniper. Professional grade. The remaining men had taken cover behind their vehicles, now returning fire blindly into the forest. Muzzle flashes lit up the gathering dusk. Bullets chewed into trees and dirt, hitting nothing but shadows. Then the barn door opened. Silas walked out into the open, no weapon visible, hands at his sides. He moved with the casual confidence of a man taking a Sunday stroll, completely unconcerned by the fact that 4 armed men were 50 yards away. Alexei, Silas's voice carried clearly, you came back. I was hoping you would. The shooting stopped. Alexei rose from behind a vehicle, his weapon trained on Silas, but his face showing confusion. This wasn't how terrified old men were supposed to behave. Where are they? Alexei demanded. The bikers. Where are they? Safe, far from here. You'll never find them. You're lying. Maybe, but you'll never know for sure, will you? Alexei's finger tightened on the trigger. Last chance, old man. Tell me where they are, or I put a bullet in your brain. Silas smiled. You could try, but I don't think you'll get the chance. Movement in the trees, not 1 position, but 3 forming a triangle around the vehicles. More shots, precise and deadly, taking out tires, engine blocks, anything that would prevent the vehicles from moving. The remaining men panicked, firing wildly at shadows they couldn't see. Silas dropped flat as bullets whistled over his head, rolling behind the water trough where one of Alexei's men had taken cover earlier. When he came up, he had a pistol in his hand that had appeared from somewhere in his clothing. 3 shots carefully aimed, each one finding its target. Not killing shots. Leg wounds, shoulder wounds, enough to take men out of the fight without ending their lives. From the loft, Decker watched in stunned silence as the entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, 4 men were on the ground, wounded or dead. 1 was running into the forest, and Alexei was on his knees with his hands on his head. Silas's pistol pressed against the base of his skull. Figures emerged from the tree line. 3 men, all of them gray-haired, all of them moving with the practiced ease of people who'd done this 1,000 times before. The first was tall and lean, carrying a rifle with a scope that looked like it cost more than a car. He approached Alexei and zip-tied his hands without ceremony. The second was shorter and broader, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades in the sun. He was checking the wounded men, rendering first aid with efficient competence. The third was somewhere in between, carrying enough equipment to stock a small army. He set down his pack and began securing the perimeter with the automatic caution of someone who knew that fights weren't over until everyone was zip-tied and disarmed. Silas stood holstering his pistol and turned to face the barn. Decker, it's clear. Bring the others. Decker climbed down from the loft on shaking legs. Jesse and Royce were staring with wide eyes, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. The tall man with the rifle approached Silas and clasped his shoulder. Ghost, you're looking old. Hawk, you're looking older. The medic looked up from his work. 2 dead, 4 wounded, none critical, 1 ran. Want me to track him? Let him go, Doc. He'll carry a message back to whoever sent him. The third man finished his perimeter check and joined them. Boom reporting, area secure, no additional hostiles detected. Though I gotta say, Ghost, you could have picked a quieter retirement. Silas almost smiled. Retirement's overrated. Boys meet the pack. Former Army Rangers, Marine Scout snipers, and one very dangerous demolitions expert. We've been dead for 15 years. He turned to Decker, who'd emerged from the barn with Jesse supporting him. These are the friends I mentioned. Tobias Doc Mercer, Clayton Hawk Hargrave, Ezra Boom Blackwood. If you're going to survive what's coming next, you're going to need to trust them like I do. Decker looked at the three gray-haired men who'd just taken apart a professional hit team like it was a training exercise. Who are you people? Doc smiled, his hand still working on a wounded man's shoulder. We're the reason they tell ghost stories in Langley and Fort Bragg. We're the operations that never happened, fighting wars that never officially existed. Hawk chambered a fresh round in his rifle. We're the old guard, son. And tonight you're going to learn why old wolves are the most dangerous kind. Ezra handed Silas a tablet showing a satellite image of the area. Shepard sent updated intel. Volkov's confirmed in the region. He's got a compound 40 miles north. Private security, heavy weapons, the full package. And he knows you're here. Silas studied the image. How many men? 12 to 15. All contractors. Former Spetsnaz mostly. The kind who won't stop coming just because you killed a few of their friends. Then we don't wait for them to come to us. Silas looked at Decker. How many members at your clubhouse? 15, like I said. Can they fight? We're bikers, not soldiers. But yeah, we can fight when we have to. Silas nodded slowly, a plan forming. Then here's what we're going to do. We're going to make Volkov think we're running, going to lead him exactly where we want him. And when he gets there, we're going to end this. Permanently. Doc finished bandaging the last wounded man and stood. You're talking about using the bikers as bait. I'm talking about making a stand. These boys refuse to work for drug dealers. That's worth protecting. Hawk checked his rifle. And Volkov. Silas's expression hardened. Prague was 37 years ago. I thought putting him in prison would be enough. I was wrong. This time I'm going to make sure he understands what happens when you come after the people under my protection. Jesse spoke up from where he sat, his voice still weak but determined. What do you need us to do? Silas looked at the young man, seeing courage fighting with fear and winning by inches. I need you to trust me. And I need you to be ready to stand with your club when the time comes. Can you do that? Jesse nodded. Yes, sir. Good man. Royce tried to sit up, gasping, as his broken arm reminded him why that was a bad idea. I can fight. Just give me a weapon. Doc moved to his side. You can fight after I set that arm properly. Boom, get me the medical kit from the truck. This is going to hurt like hell, brother. As Doc worked, Silas gathered the others. We've got maybe 6 hours before Volkov realizes his team didn't report back. When that happens, he'll either come in force or pull back to regroup. Either way, we need to be ready. Clayton studied the satellite image on the tablet. The Iron Wolves clubhouse. It's on Route 12, right? Decker nodded. Yeah. Why so? Because Route 12 runs through Timber Ridge Pass. Narrow roads, steep grades, limited sight lines. Perfect ambush terrain. Ezra pulled up a topographic map. We set shaped charges here and here. Disable their vehicles when they're committed to the pass. They'll have no choice but to fight on foot uphill against prepared positions. They'll expect an ambush, Hawk pointed out. Let them expect it, Silas said. Expecting it and surviving it are two different things. Decker, I need you to call your club. Tell them to evacuate the clubhouse. Women, children, anyone who can't fight, get them to safety. And the ones who can fight, we're going to need them. Every gun, every man who's willing to stand. This isn't just about revenge. Volkov's operation is flooding Montana with fentanyl. He won't stop with you. He won't stop with me. He'll keep going until someone stops him permanently. Decker met Silas's eyes. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about ending a threat. There's a difference. Is there? Silas was quiet for a long moment. In Beirut, I learned that sometimes the only way to save lives is to take them. In Prague, I learned that putting men in prison isn't always enough. Some evil won't stay buried. Some threats won't go away just because you lock them up. He looked at each of them in turn. The old guard, the 3 broken bikers, young and old, military and civilian, all of them bound together by circumstance and violence and the simple choice to stand up instead of running away. I'm 73 years old, Silas said quietly. I've spent the last 15 years trying to be something I'm not, trying to forget the things I've done. But tonight in this moment, and I remember exactly who I am and what I'm good at. He picked up an AR-15 and checked the chamber. I'm good at keeping people alive. I'm good at making hard choices when no one else will. And I'm very, very good at making sure that evil men understand there are consequences for their actions. Decker stood using the workbench for support. Then let's go to war. Outside, the last light of day faded into darkness. Somewhere in the mountains, Dmitry Volkov was learning that his team had failed. And somewhere in the forest between here and there, old wolves were preparing to remind him why some men should have stayed in their cages. The pack was awake, and they were done hiding. The convoy moved through the Montana darkness like a funeral procession, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the forest night. 4 vehicles. Silas's truck in the lead, followed by 2 SUVs belonging to the old guard, and bringing up the rear, Decker riding in a borrowed pickup with Jesse in the passenger seat, and Royce stretched out in the bed with enough morphine in him to dull the pain, but not enough to put him under. They'd left the ranch at midnight, left behind the bodies of 2 dead contractors and 4 wounded ones zip-tied in the barn, with anonymous calls placed to the sheriff's department that would arrive in exactly 90 minutes. Long enough for the pack to be gone. Short enough that the wounded wouldn't bleed out waiting. Silas drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes scanning the road ahead with the automatic vigilance of a man who'd survived by never assuming anywhere was safe. In the passenger seat, Doc checked and rechecked his medical supplies, the quiet routine of a medic preparing for casualties he hoped wouldn't come. Behind them, Hawk rode with Ezra at the wheel, his rifle broken down and laid across his lap, each component clean and ready for rapid assembly. The third vehicle carried supplies, weapons, and the equipment needed to turn a motorcycle clubhouse into a fortress. The radio crackled, Decker's voice strained but functional. "How much further?" 20 miles to the clubhouse, Silas replied. 15 to Timber Ridge Pass. We'll stage there first, set the trap, then fall back to the clubhouse to wait. My boys are going to have questions. Let them ask, but make sure they understand this isn't a game. The men coming aren't street thugs or rival bikers. They're professionals who kill for money and won't lose sleep over it. A pause, then understood. Doc glanced at Silas. You sure about this, using civilians as part of the defense? They're not civilians yet anymore. They became combatants the moment they refused to work for Volkov's cartel. They just didn't know it yet. That's a fine distinction when bullets start flying. It's the only distinction that matters. Silas downshifted as the road began to climb. Decker and his club made a choice. They stood up when they could have caved. That choice has consequences, and one of those consequences is learning to fight for what they believe in. Doc was quiet for a moment. You sound like you did in Beirut, right before the barracks. I sound like a man who's tired of watching good people get crushed by evil ones. Ghost, you can't save everyone. No, but I can save these 3 and their club. And maybe if I do that, it makes up for some of the ones I couldn't save. Doc didn't respond. There was nothing to say. They'd had this conversation before in different cities, different wars, different decades. The weight never got lighter. You just got stronger at carrying it. The Iron Wolves clubhouse appeared through the trees like something out of an outlaw movie. A long, low building that had started life as a roadhouse in the 50s and evolved over decades into something that was part bar, part fortress, part family home. Motorcycles lined up in neat rows out front, lights blazing in every window. And standing on the porch, backlit and armed, a dozen men who looked like they'd stepped out of a Harley-Davidson catalog. Silas pulled into the gravel lot and killed the engine. The other vehicles arranged themselves in a defensive semicircle, blocking the road and providing cover if things went wrong. The man on the porch was built like a bear, 6'4" and easily 250, with a gray beard that hung to his chest and arms covered in tattoos that disappeared into a sleeveless leather vest. He descended the steps slowly, his hand resting on a pistol at his hip that looked like a toy in his massive fist. Decker. His voice was a rumble of thunder. You look like hammered shit. Feel worse, Hammer. Decker climbed out of the truck, moving carefully, Jesse supporting his weight. These are the men I told you about. They saved our lives. Hammer's eyes moved across the old guard, evaluating, calculating. You don't look like cops. We're not, Silas said, stepping forward. We're the people who kept your president and his brothers alive when someone wanted them dead. And we're the people who are going to help you make sure that someone doesn't come back to finish the job. Pretty words, but I don't know you. You don't need to know me. You need to listen to Decker. He'll tell you what's coming, and then you'll decide if you want to stand and fight or run and hide. Either way, we don't have much time. Hammer looked at Decker. Talk. They moved inside. The clubhouse was exactly what Silas expected. Pool tables in a bar that ran the length of the room, photographs on the walls showing decades of brotherhood and rides and rallies, a memorial wall with names and dates of members who'd died, the kind of place where loyalty meant something and blood was thicker than water. 15 members of the Iron Wolves sat or stood in a rough circle. Some looked eager, some looked scared. All of them looked to Decker for guidance. Decker stood in the center, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but determined. 3 days ago, the Serpent Riders gave us an ultimatum. Work for them, move their product, or get out of Montana. We said no. We've always said no to that poison. Nods around the room. Agreement. Yesterday, they decided to send a message. Ram me, Royce, and Jesse off the road. Beat us. Left us in the forest to die. Would have worked too, except for him. He gestured to Silas. This man found us, saved our lives, and then he called in friends who stopped the serpents from coming back to finish what they started. Hammer spoke up. Why, what's he get out of it? Silas answered before Decker could. I get to sleep at night knowing I didn't walk past 3 men who were left to die because they stood up for something. That's what I get. Bullshit. Nobody does something for nothing. You're right. I'm doing it because 37 years ago, a Russian arms dealer named Dmitry Volkov was trafficking weapons and humans through Prague. I put him in prison for it. 4 months ago, he got out. And now he's here in Montana backing the Serpent Riders, flooding your state with fentanyl and using your club as his way to expand territory. Silas stepped forward. He's not here for you. Not really. You're just in the way. He's here for me because I'm the one who destroyed his organization and took away 30 years of his life. He wants revenge, and he's willing to kill every single one of you to get it. The room was silent. Someone coughed. A chair scraped. So what do we do? This from a younger member, maybe 30, with nervous energy radiating off him like heat. We give him what he wants, Silas said. We make him think he's winning, draw him into a trap, and then we end this, permanently. Hammer crossed his arms. You're talking about killing. I'm talking about survival. Volkov won't stop. The serpents won't stop. This isn't a territory dispute that gets settled with a fistfight and a handshake. This is war. And in war, you either win or you die. We're bikers, not soldiers. Then learn fast, because soldiers are coming and they won't care about the distinction. Decker spoke up. Hammer, I've seen these men fight. They took apart 6 professional contractors like it was nothing. They know what they're doing, and more than that, they're willing to stand with us when they could just walk away. Hammer studied Silas for a long moment. How old are you? 73. And you think you can fight a war? I've fought wars in places you've never heard of against enemies that made Volkov look like a playground bully. Tactics don't change with age. Determination doesn't either. And sometimes the only way to stop evil is to meet it head on. Hammer looked around the room at his club, his brothers, his family. Vote. Everyone who wants to fight, stay standing. Everyone who wants to evacuate and let these old men handle it, sit down. Nobody sat. Hammer turned back to Silas. Looks like you got yourself an army, old man. Now tell us how we're going to use it. The next 3 hours were controlled chaos. Ezra turned the clubhouse into a makeshift armory, inventorying weapons and ammunition, distributing gear to men who'd never worn tactical vests before. Hawk set up a sniper position on the clubhouse roof with clear lines of fire down the approach road. Doc established a medical station in what had been the clubhouse kitchen, laying out supplies and giving crash courses in combat first aid to anyone who would listen. And Silas stood in the center of it all, drawing diagrams on a whiteboard, explaining fields of fire and kill zones and fallback positions with the calm authority of a general planning a campaign. Timber Ridge Pass is our first line of defense, he said, pointing to a map. Narrow roads, steep walls, limited visibility. Ezra's going to place charges here and here. He tapped 2 points on the map. When Volkov's convoy enters the pass, we blow the charges. Disable their vehicles. Force them to fight on foot in terrain that favors defense. And if they don't take the bait, Hammer asked, they will, because we're going to make sure they know exactly where we are. We'll leave a trail. Make it obvious we're here and waiting. That's suicide. That's tactics. Volkov spent 4 months planning his revenge. He's not going to pass up an opportunity when it's handed to him, especially if he thinks we're cornered. Hawk spoke from his position near the window. What about air support? Volkov's got resources. He could bring in a helicopter, bypass the pass entirely. Shepard's monitoring aviation traffic. Anything unusual gets flagged. Besides, Volkov won't use air support. Too public, too many witnesses. He wants this quiet. Decker limped over to the map. After the pass, then what? Then we fall back here. The clubhouse becomes our fortress. We've got good sight lines, defensible positions, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. For how long? Long enough for federal authorities to respond. Shepard's already preparing packages for the FBI, DEA, ATF. Evidence of Volkov's operation locations personnel. The moment shooting starts, he sends it all. Volkov will have every agency in the country looking for him. And if we don't make it that long, Silas met his eyes, then we make sure we take enough of them with us that the ones left standing wish they'd never come. It was grim, it was brutal, and it was honest. The bikers absorbed it in silence. Then Hammer spoke. All right, we're in. Tell us what you need. What Silas needed was time. Time to set the charges, time to position shooters, time to turn a stretch of mountain road into a killing field that would make Volkov regret every decision that had brought him to Montana. They had 4 hours until dawn. 4 hours to prepare for a battle that would determine whether the Iron Wolves survived as a club or died as a footnote in Volkov's revenge. They made every second count. Ezra and 2 of the bikers took the first vehicle to Timber Ridge Pass carrying enough C4 to drop a building. They worked in darkness, placing charges with the precision of a surgeon running detonation cords, setting backup triggers in case the primary failed. Hawk positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the pass, his rifle already zeroed for the distance, spare magazines laid out in a neat row beside him. From here, he could see 5 miles in either direction. Nothing would enter that pass without him knowing. Doc stayed at the clubhouse with Royce, using the extra time to properly set the broken arm insert pins, wrap it in a cast that would let the big man function even if he shouldn't. Royce took it without complaint, his jaw clenched, sweat pouring down his face. And Silas moved through it all like a ghost, checking preparations, adjusting positions, making small corrections that would mean the difference between life and death when the shooting started. Jesse found him on the clubhouse porch an hour before dawn. The kid had cleaned up, changed clothes, but the bruises on his face were darkening into ugly purples and yellows. "Can I ask you something?" Jesse said. Silas nodded. "Why are you really doing this? I know what you said in there, but there's something else, isn't there?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, watching the sky lighten in the east. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "When I was your age, I made choices that cost people their lives. Good people. People who trusted me to bring them home." He paused. "I spent the next 50 years trying to make up for those losses, trying to save enough people that maybe the scales would balance. Did they balance, I mean? No, they never do, but you keep trying anyway, because the alternative is giving up, and I'm too stubborn for that." Jesse was quiet, processing. "I'm scared." "Good. Fear keeps you alive. The men who aren't scared are the ones who get killed doing something stupid. Were you scared in all those wars?" "Every single day. But I learned something important. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what needs to be done despite the fear." He looked at Jesse. "You've already done that. You stood with your brothers when you could have run. That's all courage is." Jesse wiped his eyes. "If we make it through this, I want to do something that matters. Not just ride bikes and drink beer. Something real." "Then do it. The world needs more people willing to stand up." The eastern sky was turning pink when the radio crackled. Hawk's voice calm and professional. "Ghost, I've got movement. 5 vehicles northbound on Route 12, 20 miles out. ETA 40 minutes. Silas keyed the radio. "Confirmed. Everyone to positions. This is not a drill. Volkov's coming." Inside the clubhouse, men grabbed weapons and moved to assigned positions. Windows were reinforced. Fields of fire were cleared. The bikers who'd never been in combat checked and rechecked their weapons with shaking hands, while veterans were with grim efficiency. Decker found Silas as he was loading magazines. "You really think this is going to work?" "I think we're about to find out. And if it doesn't," Silas handed him a loaded AR-15, "then we make sure our last stand is one worth remembering." Timber Ridge Pass was a scar cut through the mountain, a narrow road that switchbacked up granite walls with drops that would kill anyone unlucky enough to go over the edge. The perfect place for an ambush. The perfect place to die. Ezra's charges were invisible, buried in the roadbed, waiting for the signal that would turn machinery into scrap metal and men into casualties. Hawk lay prone on his ridge-eye to the scope, breathing slow and steady. Below him, the convoy appeared around a bend. 5 black SUVs moving in tactical formation, keeping proper distance, demonstrating the kind of discipline that confirmed everything Silas had said about professional contractors. The lead vehicle entered the kill zone. Ezra's voice on the radio. On your mark, Ghost. Silas waited. Patience, timing. The difference between a good ambush and a great one was knowing exactly when to spring the trap. The second vehicle entered. The third. All five vehicles were committed, now hemmed in by the narrow road and the steep walls with nowhere to go but forward or back. Now, Silas said quietly, the world exploded. Shaped charges detonated with surgical precision, blowing tires and axles and engine blocks, sending vehicles careening into walls and each other. Metal shrieked, glass shattered. Men shouted in Russian and English and languages that didn't matter because pain sounds the same in any tongue. Hawk's rifle spoke once, twice, three times. Each shot carefully placed, each one finding its target. Not killing shots, disabling shots. Take out the drivers, the shooters, the men who looked like leaders. Return fire came fast and professional bullets chewing into rock and dirt, searching for the sniper they couldn't see. But Hawk had already displaced, moving to a secondary position, disappearing like smoke. Silas watched through binoculars from a position half a mile back. Counted bodies, assessed the damage, made calculations. 8 men down or wounded. 7 still fighting. Vehicles disabled. They'd have to continue on foot or retreat. For a moment he thought they might retreat. Thought the losses might be enough to make them reconsider. Then the door of the middle vehicle opened and a figure stepped out. Even from half a mile away, even through binoculars, Silas recognized him. Dmitry Volkov, 68 years old, white beard, scar running from his eye to his jaw. Leaning on a cane but standing straight and proud despite the chaos around him. He looked directly at the ridge where Hawk had been positioned, looked at the disabled vehicles, looked at his wounded men, and smiled. Then he reached into the vehicle and pulled out a radio. His voice amplified, somehow echoed through the pass. Ghost, I know you're watching. Very good. Very tactical. You learned well in Prague. He walked forward using the cane, unafraid of the bullets that had been flying seconds before. But you made mistake. You think this is all I bring. You think I am stupid old man who walks into trap with no plan. Volkov laughed, the sound carrying across the distance. I know you, Ghost. I study you for 37 years. I know how you think. I know you protect the innocent. I know you save everyone you can. He pulled out a phone and held it up. So I give you choice, one phone call, and I send message to my men at your clubhouse. You see, while you set trap here, I send separate team there. Small team, quiet team. They arrived 1 hour ago. Volkov's smile widened. Right now, they hold your biker friends. The women, the children, the families your iron wolves tried to hide. You fight me here, I give signal, they all die. You surrender to me, I let them live. Silas's blood ran cold. Doc's voice on the radio. Ghost, he's bluffing. Has to be. But Silas knew Volkov, knew what he was capable of, knew that a man who'd trafficked children in Prague wouldn't hesitate to kill them in Montana. Hawk status at clubhouse? Silas demanded. A different voice answered. Hammer's voice, but wrong, strained, angry. Silas, we got a problem. 6 men just hit us from the rear. They had Jesse. They were using him to get close. Grabbed 3 of the women and 2 kids before we even knew what was happening. They're barricaded in the main room. Say they'll start shooting hostages in 10 minutes if you don't give Volkov what he wants. The world tilted. Jesse, they'd taken Jesse first. Used him as a way in. Silas's mind raced through scenarios. The ambush at the pass was a diversion. The real play had always been the clubhouse. Volkov had sent a secondary team to circle around, grab hostages, and force Silas's hand. And they'd use Jesse to do it. How? Silas demanded. Hammer's voice was heavy with guilt. Kid went out for a smoke an hour ago, never came back. We thought he was just clearing his head. By the time we realized something was wrong, they were already inside. Volkov's voice echoed again. 10 minutes, Ghost, then I start killing children. Your choice, your life for theirs. What will the great Ghost do? Silas lowered the binoculars. Doc's voice on the radio. Ghost, we can fight our way in. We can... No, Silas said quietly. You can't, not without casualties, not without dead hostages. So what do we do? Silas was already moving, walking toward the pass, toward Volkov. I give him what he wants. That's suicide. That's tactics. Volkov wants me alive, wants to gloat, wants to make me watch while he destroys everything I tried to protect. That gives you time. Time to get into position. Time to take out his team at the clubhouse. Time to save those people. He stripped his weapons as he walked. Pistol on the ground. Rifle. Knife. Everything that could be used as a weapon. Ghost, there has to be another way, Ezra's voice. There isn't, and we don't have time to find one. Silas kept walking. You three get back to the clubhouse. Use the entry points I showed you. Get those hostages out. Don't worry about me. We're not leaving you, Hawk said. You're not leaving me. You're saving 5 innocent people. That's the mission now. I'm just the distraction. He was 50 yards from Volkov now, 30, 20. Volkov's men had their weapons trained on him, but they held fire at a gesture from their boss. Ghost, Volkov said, his smile widening. Finally, after all these years, you come to me. Let them go, Silas said. All of them. The hostages at the clubhouse. Your word. My word, Volkov laughed. You destroyed my life based on your word, your testimony, your promises that justice would be served. And now you ask for my word. I'm asking you to be better than I thought you were. Volkov's expression darkened. I spent 30 years in cage because of you. 30 years dreaming of this moment. Why would I be better? Because those children in the clubhouse didn't put you in that cage. I did. They're innocent. Were the children in Prague innocent? The ones I sold, you seem to think so. You destroyed my empire to save them. Volkov stepped closer. But I wonder, Ghost, if you could go back knowing what it cost you, would you still make same choice? Silas met his eyes. Every single time. Even knowing it leads here to your death. Especially knowing that. Volkov studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed a message. I tell my men to wait, to hold hostages, but not harm them. Yet, you and I, we settle old business first. Then I decide about children. Your word on that, my word, for what it's worth to you. Silas nodded slowly. It was the best he was going to get, and it bought time for the old guard to move. Volkov gestured to his men. They moved forward, zip-tied Silas's hands behind his back, searched him for weapons they'd already seen him discard. Professional, thorough, no chances taken. Good, Volkov said. Now we go to your clubhouse, together. And you watch as I decide the fate of people you tried to save. Just like I watched as courts decided my fate because of your testimony. They loaded Silas into one of the damaged SUVs that still ran. Volkov sat beside him, the cane across his lap, that cruel smile never fading. You know what is funny, Ghost? All these years I think you are different. Better than me. Moral, righteous. But look at us now. 2 old men who destroyed each other's lives because we believe our way is right. There's a difference, Silas said quietly. You sold children. I saved them. You destroyed families, mine included. Wife left me when I went to prison. Son refuses to speak my name. You took everything. You took it yourself when you chose that business. Volkov was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, bitter and cold. Perhaps, but does it matter now? You are here, hands tied, powerless, and I hold all the pieces. The drive to the clubhouse took 30 minutes that felt like hours. Silas used the time to think, to plan, to run through every scenario that might save those hostages. The old guard would be moving by now. Hawk with his rifle, Ezra with his breaching charges, Doc with his medical supplies. They'd use the underground passage that Silas had shown them, the old bootlegger's tunnel that connected to the clubhouse basement. They'd get in position, wait for the right moment. All Silas had to do was create that moment, give them the opening they needed, even if it cost him everything. The clubhouse appeared through the trees. Volkov's men had secured the perimeter, 6 men outside, weapons ready. And inside through the windows, Silas could see shadows moving, the hostages, and the men holding them. Volkov's phone buzzed. He read the message and smiled. My men say you are being very cooperative. Good. That is good for the hostages. They pulled Silas from the SUV and marched him to the door. It opened before they reached it. Inside, the clubhouse had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Pool tables overturned for cover, the bar smashed. And in the center of the room, 5 people sat on the floor, hands zip-tied, terror in their eyes. 3 women, 2 children. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6. And standing guard over them, Jesse Thorne. His face was bruised, his hands were free, and he held a gun pointed at the hostages with shaking hands. Jesse, Silas said quietly. The kid's eyes met his. There was shame there, guilt, but also something else, something that gave Silas hope. Defiance. I'm sorry, Jesse said. They grabbed me, said they'd kill everyone in the clubhouse if I didn't help them get inside. I didn't know what else to do. You did what you had to, Silas replied. No shame in that. Volkov laughed. How touching. The old wolf forgives the young one for betraying him. But it changes nothing. You are here. They are here. And now we have conversation about justice and consequences. He walked around the hostages slowly. These women, they are wives of your biker friends, yes, and children, they are innocent, just like children in Prague. He stopped in front of the youngest girl, pulled his pistol, aimed it at her head. So I ask you again, Ghost, if you could go back to Prague knowing it leads here, would you still choose to save those children, knowing it costs these children their lives? Silas's voice was steady despite the rage building in his chest. Those are different choices, different situations. Are they both involve innocent children? Both involve you making choice about who lives and who dies. You chose Prague children over my freedom. Now I choose these children over your life. Fair trade, I think. This isn't about fair. This is about revenge. Is there difference? Volkov's finger moved to the trigger. Last words, Ghost. Before I kill this child and make you watch others die. What do you say? Silas looked at Jesse, met the kid's eyes, and saw understanding there. I say, Silas replied slowly, carefully, that legends don't die easy. It wasn't a signal the enemy would recognize. But Jesse had been listening when Silas told stories, had been paying attention when the old guard talked about tactics and codes and ways to communicate in hostile situations. The kid's eyes widened slightly. Understanding, recognition. Then everything happened at once. Jesse dropped to the floor, pulling two of the hostages down with him. Silas threw himself backward, knocking into Volkov and the man behind him. And the floor beneath the center of the room exploded upward. Not an actual explosion. A breaching charge, controlled and precise, blowing the hidden trapdoor off its hinges. Smoke filled the space. Flashbangs detonated. And through the chaos came the old guard. Doc emerged first, cutting zip ties on hostages with a knife that flashed in the strobing light. Ezra came up, firing his weapon, speaking in short, controlled bursts that drove Volkov's men into cover. And Hawk came through the main door, having eliminated the exterior guards in perfect silence. Volkov spun, trying to bring his weapon to bear, but Silas was already moving despite his bound hands. He drove his shoulder into Volkov's midsection, knocking the older man off balance. The pistol fired wild, the bullet going into the ceiling. Jesse was on his feet now, the gun he'd been holding turned on Volkov's men. He fired twice the shots, surprisingly steady for someone who'd claimed to have never shot at a person. Both rounds found their targets. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, 4 of Volkov's men were down. 2 were fleeing into the forest. And Volkov himself was on his knees, Doc's pistol pressed against the base of his skull. Ezra cut Silas's zip ties. You good? I'm good, Niyashdin. The hostages, all safe, scared but unharmed. Silas turned to Jesse. The kid was staring at the gun in his hands, realization of what he'd just done washing over him. Jesse, Silas's voice cut through the shock. You did good. You protected them. You made the right call. I shot people. I killed. You saved 5 innocent lives. You stood up when it mattered. That's all that counts. Jesse's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off the weight of what had happened, settling on his shoulders. Decker appeared in the doorway, Hammer and 3 other Iron Wolves behind him. They'd been securing the perimeter, making sure no other threats remained. Clear, Decker reported. Then he saw the hostages, saw Jesse, saw Silas alive and standing, and something like relief washed across his face. We heard the shooting. Thought, we're okay, Silas said. All of us. Volkov laughed from his position on the floor. It was a broken sound, bitter and defeated. You think you win? You think this ends anything? Silas walked over to him, knelt down so they were eye to eye. Sorry? Yeah, I do, because this time everyone knows what you are. This time the evidence goes to every agency, every prosecutor, every person who needs to know. You wanted revenge. You got attention instead. Every federal agency in the country will be looking into your operation now. He stood. You could have disappeared, could have lived out your life quiet and free, but you came after me instead. And in doing so, you destroyed yourself more completely than I ever could. Sirens in the distance now, multiple vehicles. Federal response that Shepard had coordinated the moment the ambush at Timber Ridge had started. FBI, DEA, ATF, Marshal Service, coming to collect evidence and prisoners and build cases that would take down what remained of Volkov's empire. Volkov's expression shifted to something like understanding. You planned this, all of it. The ambush was not trap for me, was trap for my organization. You sacrificed yourself to draw all my resources into one place where they could be captured. I gave you what you wanted, Silas said quietly. Me, vulnerable, surrendering to save innocence. And while you were busy savoring your victory, the net closed around everything you rebuilt. Volkov stared at him for a long moment. Then he spat on the floor. You are not Hero Ghost. You are just old man who got lucky. Maybe, but I'm an old man who kept his people alive. And you're an old man who'll spend the rest of his life in a cell. I'll take that trade. Federal agents poured through the door. They took Volkov in chains, took his men, took evidence and testimony, and began the long process of justice. And in the clubhouse, as the sun climbed higher over Montana, Silas sat with the Iron Wolves and the Old Guard and the 5 people they'd saved and let himself breathe. The battle was over. The war was won, and everyone who mattered had survived. 3 weeks later, Silas stood in a cemetery on a hill overlooking a valley. The graves were old, weathered by decades of wind and rain. The Beirut Memorial, 241 Marines who died when the barracks fell. He placed flowers on 3 specific graves, the 3 Marines who'd dug him out, who'd saved his life when they could have saved themselves. Kept the promise, he said quietly. Kept digging people out, every single one I could reach. He paused. Hope you're proud. Hope it was worth it. The wind carried his words away. Behind him, Doc and Hawk and Ezra stood at attention, the Old Guard paying respects to brothers they'd never met but understood completely. And behind them, wearing leather vests over dress shirts, stood Decker and Royce and Jesse and Hammer and a dozen other Iron Wolves who'd driven 600 miles to be here, to honor the men who'd shaped the warrior who'd saved their lives. When the ceremony ended, they walked together to the parking lot. Motorcycles and trucks, old men and young, military and civilian, brothers not by blood but by choice. Decker approached Silas. What now? Now I go back to my ranch, fix the fence, plant the garden, try to live quietly. You think that'll work, the living quietly part? Silas almost smiled. Probably not, but I'll try anyway. Jesse spoke up, his voice stronger than it had been 3 weeks ago. We want you to know something. The club voted. You're an honorary member. Iron Wolves for life. If you ever need anything, you call. We come. He handed Silas a leather vest. On the back, the Iron Wolf patch. On the front, a single word, Ghost. Silas took it, feeling the weight of belonging. I'm honored. We're the ones who are honored, Hammer said. You could have walked away, could have let us die, but you stood up. That's something we won't forget. They shook hands, made promises to stay in touch, made plans that might or might not happen, and then Silas drove home to Montana, to his ranch in the forest, to the quiet life he'd earned through 5 decades of war. But the vest rode in the passenger seat, a reminder that he wasn't alone, that he had brothers, that the family you choose is sometimes stronger than the family you were born into. 2 years later, Silas Brennan passed away in his sleep. Heart attack, peaceful, 75 years old. The funeral was held on a clear autumn morning when the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the promise of winter. The cemetery was full. The Old Guard stood at attention in their dress uniforms. Doc, Hawk, Ezra, the last of a generation that had fought in wars the world had forgotten. The Iron Wolves came 50-strong motorcycles stretching for a quarter-mile down the mountain road, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Federal agents attended, representing the agencies that had used Volkov's evidence to dismantle trafficking networks across 3 continents. Lives saved that would never know the name of the man who'd saved them. And in the back, standing quietly, 5 people, 3 women and 2 children. The hostages from the clubhouse, now years older, who'd come to say goodbye to the man who'd traded his life for theirs and somehow survived. Decker gave the eulogy. He stood at the podium looking out at the crowd and took a breath. I met Silas Brennan when I was dying in a forest. Me and my brothers left for dead by men who wanted to make us disappear. We should have died there. Should have been another statistic. 3 bikers who rode too deep and never came back. He paused. But we didn't die, because a 73-year-old man decided that 3 strangers were worth saving, worth fighting for, worth standing beside when every logical choice said walk away. But Silas could have called 911 and let the system handle it, could have ignored us entirely and gone back to his quiet life, could have done 100 different things that would have been easier and safer. But he didn't, because Silas understood something most people forget. Strength isn't about how loud you are or how many fights you win. It's about standing up when it matters, about keeping your promises even when no one's watching, about being the kind of person who digs people out of rubble because that's what good people do. His voice caught slightly. Silas saved my life, saved my brothers, saved our families. Not because he had to, because he chose to. And in making that choice, he taught us what it means to be a man worth remembering. He was 73 years old. He'd earned his rest, earned his peace. But when people needed him, he stood up, and he kept standing until the fight was won. Decker touched the iron wolf patch on his vest. Ride eternal ghost. We'll hold the line till we meet again. Hammer stepped forward. He laid a leather vest on the casket, the ghost vest, the symbol of brotherhood earned through blood and fire. You taught us what honor looks like, Hammer said simply. We won't forget. The old guards saluted in perfect unison. The iron wolves revved their engines, a thunder that rolled across the valley like a promise. And as they lowered Silas Brennan into the ground, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the mountains in shades of gold. 5 years after that, the world had moved on. But some things remained. Jesse Thorne stood in a hospital wearing an EMT uniform with 3 years' experience saving lives instead of taking them. On his locker was a photograph. Silas Brennan, the man who'd shown him what courage looked like. Royce Dalton taught mechanics to at-risk youth in a garage he'd built with his own hands. Above the workbench hung another photograph. The ghost. The old wolf who'd given him a second chance. Decker Kane ran a veterans shelter, a place where men who'd seen war could find peace and brotherhood. The main hall had a memorial wall, and at the center, in a place of honor, was a photograph of Silas Brennan and the words, "He taught us to stand up." The Iron Wolves still rode, still refused to compromise, still stood for something in a world that often stood for nothing. And when they rode, they carried the ghost memory with them, a reminder that legends don't die when their hearts stop. They live on in the people they saved, in the lessons they taught, in the choices made by those who knew them. Dmitry Volkov died in a federal prison in 2028 at age 70 of complications from pneumonia. No one attended his funeral. His obituary was 3 sentences long. Silas Brennan's legacy couldn't fit in 1,000 books. Because legends aren't measured in words or years or victories. They're measured in the lives they touch, the people they save, the courage they inspire in others to stand up when standing up costs everything. And by that measure, Silas Ghost Brennan was a legend that would never die. He just waits in the pines, ready to wake up whenever the world needs to remember what honor looks like.